that, I am really excited to introduce my collaborator for this session, Katarina Berg. Katarina is the CHRO of Spotify. She's a friend, she's a trailblazer in HR. And Katarina, it's always weird when somebody else introduces you. So let me actually turn it over to you, have you fill in the gaps with your introduction, and then we'll jump right in.
No, thank you, Lars. And it's, as always, it's a pleasure to do something like this with you, being, more or less the face of HR, I think, globally for quite some time now. Yes, I do head up the HR team at Spotify. I've done so the last 8 years. Excited to be here. And I think we will go into what it means to actually do this or introduce new programs when you're also in hypergrowth.
Cool. Well, I want to spend some time digging into your Work From Anywhere program. But before we even get to that, the last 18 months, understatement alert, have been a lot. We've experienced a lot as a global community. We've experienced a lot as HR leaders and practitioners. Before we even get into Work From Anywhere, how would you summarize the last 18 months from your perspective?
I think with one sentence, I think it's been a blessing and a curse. I think that's it, right? There's so many things that we learned about ourselves, a lot of things that we didn't want to learn about ourselves, a lot of things that we could pressure test in reality when it comes to what a workplace actually is, and what it doesn't have to be and what it could be in the future. And also, I think we all suffered from being forced to work from home, which is a totally different thing from, when you can work from anywhere or when work from anywhere. So I think it's a mixed bag of a lot of things, from emotions to really data points that is useful. Individual, team, company, workplace.
So I think, you nailed it. It's been a lot. It's been a lot on every level. I think that's been the real kind of weight of all of this, is it's impacted every aspect of our lives, work lives, personal lives, family lives, all of it. And so, the decision to go, you announced earlier this year, still I think a lot of companies were, this is pre-Delta for the most part. I think a lot of companies were optimistic about making return to office plans, and that train seemed to be full speed ahead as we had an idea of how vaccination accessibility and availability was beginning to tick up. But even at that time, when a lot of HR leaders were making their return to workplace plans, you went the other direction and you announced Work From Anywhere. And so, walk me behind the scenes. How did that come to be? What were the internal conversations that you were having with your executive peers that kind of led you to kind of land on that model early?
Right. So I think one of the reasons why we did that, no matter what was happening around the world, since we have 79 offices right now, and we are based in all time zones, from Sydney to San Francisco, right? But 5 years ago, I think it might even be 6 years ago, Daniel, our founder, our CEO, started to have a conversation with me about becoming distributed first. And I think he was challenging me. I think he had a vision, which he usually has. And I thought three things. I thought it was too early. I didn't think that our leadership was up for it. I didn't really think that it was something that was asked or even needed, or maybe that the people did not necessarily ask for it either. And then the last point, I don't think I was ready for distributed first 100% 5 or 6 years ago. And then we had more and more, I think, in-depth conversation what that meant. And there were a couple of things that made me change my mind. One was, if you really think about it, if you are in all those time zones that I mentioned, and if you have more than one office, or your office is on more than one floor, the way that we behave, we don't usually get up from our chair and walk over to people that doesn't sit very close to us. And then if you then come to the realization that you are distributed already, no matter if there is a pandemic or what the future holds, then I think, at least for me, it was easier. The second thing, all the things that are chosen truth, we could really pressure test. And we could do that the first quarter, the second quarter, and now here we are 20 months later. So there's a lot of things that we know for sure now. For instance, work is something that you do. It's not a place you come into. If you have that as your foundation, into work, it was quite easy to task, the whole project management team, which is actually Anna Lundström and Alex Westerdahl in my team, in the HR team. Like, what does this mean? If we would go and launch a work from anywhere program, what are the things that you could easily either turn away from, like it's not possible, it's not doable, labor law, taxes, salary, on and on and on. Or what does that mean because it's relevant for us? So I think what really happened with pandemic was that we had a fast forward, right? We accelerated all our thoughts, and we kind of dare to launch the program no matter if it's going to linger on or whatever. And we do it for 3 reasons. One, obviously for attraction, the typical HR answer on everything, right? Two, retention, which is the second very typical answer on everything, but it's true. And the third thing is we wanted to be able to cast the net for new talent in new pools or waters that we couldn't before, because you needed to have people to sign up for a specific office. And all of a sudden we thought like, well, there are people that are either gig freaks, or that they don't want to move, or they for some reason don't want to be in a location where we had an office. So this was really important to us. So I think that's why we were able to do this quite early this year. I think it was in February that we launched it, and then we started to communicate about it in March this year.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioning kind of Daniel's kind of coming to you with that, with pressure testing the idea of work from anywhere even 5 years ago. And I think I hear from a lot of HR practitioners that it's almost the reverse, where their CEOs might be applying pressure to get people back into an office, and it's the HR leaders who are pushing back. They're a bit closer to the employee sentiment and saying this is not what our employees are wanting and needing right now. It's going to cause problems for us if we have a hard line about this. One thing just to mention for the attendees, if any of you viewing have questions for Katarina or myself, jump over to the Q&A tab next to the chat window and just list your questions. I'm going to save some time on the back end of our discussion to bring some of your questions into our chat. I definitely won't be able to keep up with them if you put them in the chat window. That's going to move fast. So if you do have any questions for either Katarina or myself, jump over to the Q&A tab, add your question there, and we'll cover as many as we can on the back end of the session. So you're having the conversations around work from anywhere. Obviously Daniel's supportive. You were designing. Were there any were there any kind of naysayers? Were there any objections that you had to overcome in kind of developing the framework for this?
We all know it, and it includes you and myself, Lars, that change doesn't necessarily something positive for most people, especially if they don't initiate the change themselves and if they don't sit on all the information. But what we could do now, and why it wasn't any naysayers, was what we kind of served the whole team at Spotify, the whole kind of band of surveys every quarter, asking how are you doing, what's working well for you, what do you kind of like, or what are you picking up, and what would you like to keep of the things that we now learn to do. And it was 2 words that came back every time, and as well as I know, and everybody on this call, right, is that you should never ask your people if you're not going to do anything with their answers. So flexibility and freedom, they really love that. And this is what we thought what we could also offer with this kind of program of ours. So no real naysayers. I think it was more the timing of the launch. And since we don't know when this pandemic will be over, people are like, why are we launching if people can't come back? But we officially moved into work from anywhere 1st of September. It looks different in different parts of the world, and in most of the world, we are not back in the office. But still, everything that supports the work from anywhere is now in place, behind the curtains, but also, fronting all the employees.
Yeah. Well, so how do you think about your kind of offices in real estate in this new structure? You mentioned, I think it was 70 offices plus around the world. That's quite a footprint from a real estate standpoint. Like, what role will offices play in your new work from anywhere model, and will it reduce the kind of real estate footprint that you have today?
Right. I think the most the most common mistake or misunderstanding from either press or from other people is that we decided to launch this because we're closing down our offices. We all know what an office does, especially if it is in a AAA location on your bottom line. It's very expensive. We're not doing this to save cost. We're not getting rid of any of these offices. And we actually launched 80 new markets when we all were in pandemic. So we rather opening a couple of offices, but they will play a different role. And this is what we think. And this is also back to when we are in dialogue with all our employees. You know how the office moved home like overnight due to the crisis. And we think when we get back to the office, or what people are telling us is that they think a bit of the home will move into the office, meaning that they want more quiet spaces. They want more collaborative spaces. They want more areas where you can be creative and innovate, which is a very big part of our DNA. And there are other things. And so we use this time when nobody is in the office to actually rebuild and redesign our offices. So they will be even more relevant for the people that choose to come into the office. We also think that they will be more of what we call the third room, or what scientists call about the third room, right? Where people can spontaneously bump into each other, no matter if they are in the same team or if they had a planned meeting or a booked meeting. And something happens then, right? With the energy, but also how we come together. And so we're going to keep them. And we think they're going to play a slightly different kind of role in the future. But there's a lot of people also that just want a freedom of the choice to sometimes go into the office and sometimes work from home and sometimes go to a co-working space or anything. So all that is possibilities within our program.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that you mentioned, kind of as you surveyed employees, freedom and choice came up the most. And I think that we're kind of in this we're entering this new era of HR where we're moving away from what historically had been playbooks in terms of the way we think about doing X, Y, or Z. And now we're creating more flexible versions of those. So employees can opt into versions of that work best for themselves. Mm-hmm. Great for employees. I think there's going to be a shift for HR. It could be a lot of work initially. Part of it is kind of moving away from that rigid mindset of legacy HR and moving more towards that modern mindset that is much more agile and flexible. And I'm curious, like when you're obviously having introduced the Work for Anywhere program earlier this year, you're further ahead than a lot of your contemporaries in terms of other organizations who are either maybe in the early days of announcing that, or maybe they're still figuring that out. What mistakes did you make that they could learn from, right? Like with the benefit of hindsight, looking back on the program, what might you have done differently that some of the viewers can learn from and maybe try to avoid those mistakes?
I think one of the mistake was that we maybe going into it thought that we could solve all the things that are not resolved. And what do I mean with that? There's a lot of things that doesn't have to do with you as an employer, right? I mentioned the borders that we usually call the country. In some of areas of the world where both you and I are at the moment, US, there are a couple of things that differ from state to state. So if we would go 100% hey, you can be 100% a digital nomad, there are a couple of things that are really, really difficult for the employee. And if you don't want to be serious and you don't want an employer, and if you maybe you say that you are people first, but you don't really act like that. There are a lot of things that you can here's your freedom. And then you, for a short while, turn out to be like really, really cool and maybe hopefully a bit sexy and also attractive. But in the long run, that doesn't really work, because if you move from one state to another, different taxes. If you move from one state to another, there could be differences in your contract. There are a couple of things that you have to look into when it comes to, what is your comp philosophy? How will you pay people if they move from one area to another area? Or will you not make a change? And I think all these things, we thought in the beginning that we will have prompt answers. We realized quite early that we would okay, we're not going to be scared. We're not going to not launch it. We're just going to be very humble about it. we don't know everything, and we don't have the answer for everything. And you know what? We're not telling other companies to do what we're doing. We're doing what's relevant for our people, for our business, and the way that we work. And this is going to help us. And then the dialogue that I mentioned before, we will continue to use that. We're going to talk to people that, what do we need to, stop doing? What should we improve? What do we need to tweak? What do we, so we will have those conversations and do those retros, and some things we need to bring back, I'm pretty sure, and some things we will, just let go. But insurances are one of those really big problems, and we're not an insurance company. If you away for more than 90 days from where your mailbox is, you're not insured. So how do we do that while we are launching a program that is called, Work From Anywhere? So it's not necessarily a staggered approach, but it has a couple of guardrails that we had to put in there so we could protect our employees and that they could feel safe, which means that we also were thinking that we might need to change the name, but then again, we are on a journey. We are going there. So I think those are the most common mistakes that we did in the beginning, that we just realized we don't have all the answers, and it's okay to say that. And the other thing that I think is one of the things, we usually say that when you join Spotify, you join, control chaos. We learned a couple of things, right? To overnight go into working from home, and we didn't have to do this transformation of going digital because we were 100% digital. But there are other things that we need to figure out. What does that mean for us, and how will we work, and how can we work more and asynchronized, right? Very, very important to do that if we're going to be distributed first. Again, I think I wanted to see if we can find the right tools that could do that now. We all know, no matter if you use, Teams today, or you use Zoom or in any other program, that they also develop really, really fast. So I think you just have to be, as I said, humble. You have to be open. You have to be transparent about the things that we know and the things that we don't know.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the humility and how you frame that, and also how you communicate with your employees. Because look, we don't have all the answers. Like we're all figuring this out as we go. And you hit a really important point, which is it's not just the philosophy around, co-located or work from anywhere. It's the remote employees, where they work, when they work, the different tax implications, all the things that you just mentioned are huge factors. So, those have to be, in the early days of this, I talked to some companies, they're like, you could work in these 30 states in the United States or these provinces in Canada. I'm just like, why is it so specific? And it was because of the laws and kind of how that is structured. That that's a very complex set of configurations, particularly when you have a broad global employee base like you do at Spotify. One of the things I want to do, I mentioned this is going to be interactive, so I'm going to pull up a poll for the viewers. I want to get your perspectives on how you're structured right now: office-centric, hybrid, or fully remote and distributed. And you can apply this to either your exact situation right now, or if you've already made some of your post-pandemic, and who knows when that's going to be, plans. Curious to get all of your feedback. So if you can jump in, add your thoughts here, this will allow us to do a little data gathering across the session to see how we are. Yeah, office-centric is not looking too popular right now. It's about 6%, hybrid 74%, fully remote's about 21%. So we're going to let some of that data continue to come in. And the one thing that I also want to do is, if you don't know Katarina, one of the things I've always admired about her is that you're a huge proponent of open source and working out loud and kind of sharing an inside view of your work practices and how you do what you do. And we're bringing that to this session as well. So if you are viewing right now, you can jump over to the handouts tab and you can actually download Spotify's Work From Anywhere deck. So for any of you that are in the process of designing some of these programs with your teams and organizations, and you're looking for some inspiration, we've got it for you. So feel free to jump over to handouts. You can download that deck. There's also some articles and some press and Spotify's blog announcement when they announce the Work From Anywhere plan that you can also check out after this session. So Again, big hat tip to you, Katarina, for sharing that with all of us. Jumping back into async, because I think to me, when you look at the big kind of risk, I think with hybrid is, right now, arguably many companies are hybrid. The way most of them got there was by taking their in-office operating systems and just porting them to digital. But for the most part, they still operate as if they were an office-based company. They're still very meeting-centric. They're still not great about documentation and just having some of the tools that you need to effectively manage both fully distributed and hybrid. So I'd love to get your thoughts there. Like, how do you think about the shift from kind of office-based coordination, collaboration, and communication to more asynchronous centric communication, collaboration, and really, as you look at work from anywhere, is it causing you to kind of re-engineer, your HR, people, operations, and systems to, digital by default and kind of asynchronous by default?
I think that is a really good, and I think it's going to be a relevant question for the year to come, to be honest, no matter who you are and how early you are to move into this space. I think one of the things that my team or the HR team at Spotify, or Spotify per se, didn't have to do is, if you're going to launch this, obviously you have trust-based leadership, kind of, right? You don't believe that your managers are looking into or controlling all the employees. It's not about when you come into work and when you leave. It's more about, how can you over-index our communication? How can you point out the direction? And how do you make sure that you kind of remove the obstacles and the blockers in the organization? And then the people that are there, that are super smart, that, just get out of the way so they can do their job, right? And figure things out. And how does that connect with how we view async work? I think it's, again, I think most of the tools that we have tried out in different groups, and especially, in the center of my team, we haven't really found one tool that we think solves everything. And I guess maybe it never will be, the same way that we haven't found one HR system that solves for everything. You kind of have to put them together. But what are we scared, and what are we really looking into that we don't want to lose now, both when we were home for 20 months and it seems like it will continue, but also in the future when it's going to be fully up to us to do work from anywhere? It is actually collaboration, right? So we're looking into tools where we were also in the mindset of that you have to come into a room or a space at the same time and be awake at the same time and build off each other's idea, or always kind of whiteboard things in a room, or have the old thinking of a war room, right? This is where the big thinking comes together. This is where all the collaboration comes together. I think we put that to shame a bit. Doesn't mean that we don't miss each other. It doesn't mean that there are a couple of things that we would gain to come in together. And it doesn't mean, again, keeping the offices, that we will not have those on-sites, off-sites, or, team meetings or strategy sessions going forward. But we're looking to tools that will help us support to engage, help us support, collaborate, and help us support building and working on the same thing, even if we are awake in different areas. And I guess this is where we are either cheating a bit, or where we practiced before the pandemic. Having people on all these locations and having managers that has managed people on all these locations, I think we practiced a bit before. The only thing that is helping us now with the holiness of the three things, right? The people and the place, wherever that is now going forward, but also technology. I think technology, we usually think that technology is what is changing our behaviors. I think that the dragging factor was actually technology for async work.
Yeah.
And I think we still don't go like, oh, have you tried this? This is awesome. We are trying things that we think is either semi-lukewarm or this could be something. We haven't found anything that will help us 100%. So on our OKRs, or our kind of objectives, what we need to nail 2022 from HR is to find the tools, async. And the second thing that worries us or challenges us, or what we will really look deep and hard and try to solve for, is how do you create belonging in a distributed first kind of organization? How do you put that connectivity and that social glue, and how do you put on and feel that you have that club blazer on that makes the Spotify band in comparison to another? Because I think we all need to feel that community feeling. So async one is we don't have all the answers, and we don't think there are tools in the toolbox that we need going forward to require or start to use. And then the other one is belonging in a distributed first world.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that belonging point in a moment. But I think as you mentioned the tools, and again, taking chances on things that you might be lukewarm on right now, but could have a high upside. It's so interesting. I think that's such a good illustration of again, when you compare and contrast kind of legacy HR to modern HR, we were created as a risk aversion function, right? We were rooted in compliance. We were designed to keep the organization out of trouble. Now we're in this other position where we are tasked with being experimental and taking risks and trying things and piloting and experimenting. And so it's just, to me, it's been fascinating to watch that evolution. But it's one of the reasons why, despite how difficult HR has been over the last 18 months, I feel there's never been a better time to work in this field. We're creating new constructs of work and new ways of working that haven't existed before, and that's a huge privilege to be able to do that kind of work. But we're able to really, in a lot of ways, kind of redesign what work even means and how it works, and that the global impact of that is massive. But I do want to come back to your comment on belonging. One of the for leaders who may be more inclined to want people in an office, one of the things that they often cite is culture. And that, you need water cooler moments, you need hallway moments, you need that serendipity of, being on the same floor with your colleagues. That's where a lot of the chemistry of, culture happens and is built. And, I don't know that is necessarily true. And I'm curious to get your perspective, especially, as you're in the earlier stages of your Work From Anywhere journey. How has this shift changed how you think about culture and belonging and building culture and belonging within the organization?
In one way, I would be maybe a bit provocative and say it hasn't changed at all. Yeah. I think, the people in your organization is the culture and vice versa, right? And if you start to think about it like that, culture is evolving all the time. And I think there is a lot of organization that does one of the biggest mistake of they have they're trying to create a strong culture. I think there's a big difference between a strong culture and the right culture. You can have a dysfunctional culture that is super strong. So I don't think that's where you want to go. The other thing is there's a lot of people that has been in the company from early days or been there for a long time. They always go, do you remember the good old days and what the culture used to be then? Then you cling on to something, right? And you're also saying that your people and the people that are there today and spending a lot of time and effort and have great impact, that they are not part of the culture. So I think you have to let it go to some extent, and then you have to also design and also care for it in so many other ways. So I think it hasn't really necessarily changed. I think there will be efforts needed in different places, right? Because people don't necessarily come across each other in the way that you can vaccinate them and give them vitamins in a way that you could when everybody was like in close, like inside a room or in a floor or in a building. So there are other methods to creating a culture that is relevant and really, the right culture for you. But I think, again, what really differs and what you can't copy and why culture is super important is we can all do a blue copy on the strategy. We can all do a blue copy on, how to put a product or a service together. You might not succeed. But when it comes to culture, it's almost impossible to do a blue copy because you will not have the same building blocks, which is the people. So I think what's interesting, I wrote a blog post, I think quite early into the pandemic, that said all eyes on HR, which I think it is. And back to your point of actually, if you don't understand your history, today doesn't necessarily make sense, and you will not be really well put up for the future. And I think that goes too. If you don't understand your skill set and your quality and what you bring to the table and why the business needs you, I think the transformation of HR into supporting the business will be very, very hard. And I think the same thing goes with culture. But I think that is one of the biggest differentiator in now as well as in the future. So you just have to find new ways to remind people. And we talk a lot about, like, we just finished something that we call the band reunion. So we brought all the band members together digitally and reminded everybody about the purpose, the why, which is part of the culture, right? Why did I join? And sometimes we talk about repurpose, sometimes about repropose. But if you think about it as your relationship with the person that you choose, that your partner, sometimes you do this, no matter if you if you ignore it or if you actually talk about it. Sometimes you go like, is this the right person? Is this the right thing? Shouldn't I be happier, or am I super happy? And then when you decide that you're going to stay, most likely, hopefully, with a company too, or with a team too, or with a manager too, when you repropose or when you repurpose yourself, you know why you are there. You understand your direction. It gives you meaning, which is one of the most important things. And back to the culture and why diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity is super important is, what is our workplace? What difference? What is the attributes? What is the things that is near and dear to us and make sense? And what are the things that we want to be reminded? And why do we come to this place instead of that place? Again, it doesn't mean, and I don't believe in the semantics, they are wrong, that is not a good culture, their product is not as good as ours. It's something else, and that it's the human touch and the social glue. And I think there are really, really good ways to make sure that people are reminded what that is. And one thing is to dare to be value driven.
Yeah. Yeah, I think an important thing to reinforce, all of that was spot on. The big takeaway is, culture is not static, and it shouldn't be. It is dynamic, and it will evolve. And will you have the same culture as a fully distributed company as you did as a co-located company? Probably not. It'll probably shift and evolve, and that's okay. I think that the biggest mistake companies can make is when they try to hold on to this notion of what their culture used to be, when they are in fact a very different company now. So that, that's just you're trying to keep a promise to your employees that you just can't keep. And so embrace the be values led, allow those to be infused in every stage of the organization as you continue to grow and evolve. But the culture itself will be dynamic, and it will change. Katarina, last question I have for you, just about work from home before we kind of broaden the conversation to other HR people topics. I imagine, once you announced work from anywhere, you probably had a lot of employees relocate, change their lives, change their lifestyles. Do any stories stand out from you of any of your bandmates who maybe just completely took advantage of this and changed their life in some profound way?
Yes, to our surprise, there were close to 60% that want to come into the office and are not planning to move anytime close. But for the other 39%, and I know I'm missing one out, I'm coming back to that. But to the other 39, I think a lot of people decided to go home. I think for the first time, as long as I've been living and also working, the green wave of, I want to go home. I'm going to bring my kids back to closer to what my upbringing was. I don't necessarily want to be dead center in a big city where it's super busy. I think people are talking more about life changing in a sustainable way, where it's easier to find maybe 2 jobs if you are in a partnership with somebody, and also wanting to be able to give their their children or their elderly more attention. And I think these are the really nice stories that we get via Slack or email, no matter if you're Daniel or if you're Katarina or if you one of the HR BPs, which is really, really cool. I think it's the same thing and fuzzy feeling that we felt when we 2015 launched, our global parental leave, when people like, we can't start to describe what this means for me or my partner or my whole family to be able to be home with our new kid, the most important time of our lives. And I think it's the same thing here. And you can change your mind too. It's not one of those like, so if you're going back to Wisconsin, you can't come back, right? It's all of that. I'm going to try. We have a lot of people that also change in countries, especially in Europe, where they always had a dream to leave maybe a somewhat cold Sweden and work and live out of Barcelona or somewhere in Spain, and to be able to give that possibility and know that it doesn't really matter, work-wise, we can actually do that. So back to the attraction and the retention. I think companies have been very clever how to attract people, but I think where we mess up is how to retain. And we know it's the same thing with employees, that with customers, much more expensive to find new ones than to keep the really good ones. So I think, any company that cracks the code of how do we stop doing stupid things to our employees or our customers, good luck and congratulations. But we all do that once in a while, and not because we want to. I think the brain is there, the heart is there, but then you have to execute, and then all of a sudden you have a couple of things. So a lot of great stories where people going back to their roots, or don't want to be in a city, but they had to move after university to get that job or that career. And I'm pretty sure that a couple of people will change their mind and then come back, but then it's their choice. It's not going to be forced.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I think we're still in the early days of this collective experience. So it'll be interesting to see like how this is, reshaped a lot of people's views and priorities and values and what's important to them, and then how workplaces and employers will adapt to that, right? I think that a lot of when you look at some of the data around people, who want to be working from home or hybrid, for a lot of them, they cite spending more time with their family, less commute time, more time for personal pursuits. It'll be interesting to, especially it wasn't all that long ago when we were in this culture of hustle and grind and, glamorizing, 15-hour work days and all that nonsense. Now we've swung very much to the other direction, where people want to have that balance. They want to have that time for their family and themselves. They want to prioritize their own well-being and mental health, as opposed to, not having any barriers and being taken advantage of. And so I think it's really interesting to see how this will continue to play out over time. But again, I think it's the people, it's job seekers, it's employees in a lot of ways who are leading this shift, and companies are going to have to respond to that. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see play out over time. I promised we'd have time for Q&A, and we will. We're going to cover a few more topics. If you do have questions for Katarina or myself, just add them to the Q&A tab, and probably at about 10 till, we'll jump into those, and we'll cover as many as we can. So I want to move away from work from anywhere for a moment and just talk a bit about, where we are in the field of HR and, people operations at this moment. I think that, your role in particular, and not, you as CHRO of Spotify, but CHROs, chief people officers, heads of people, you've been on the front lines of all of these changes during these dynamic times, whether it's the pandemic, shifting remote, having different conversations around social justice and racism and anti-racism in society and in our workplaces. So much of what has been going on, HR has been right in the middle of. And I'm curious to get your thoughts. If you thought about maybe the profile of a CHRO 2 years ago compared to the profile, I should say the ideal profile of a CHRO today, what's changed? What skill sets, like what skills do you most need to call upon and rely upon in your day-to-day to lead your team and the organization?
Well, if we start with the basics that I don't necessarily think has changed, and I think, compassion is one of those, or being, or daring to be empathetic is maybe a better currency for any manager or leader today. But I think that is important. I think HR acumen, of course. I think we are the only profession in the world that has 171 colors on our palette. Not saying that our job is harder or more important than any other occupation, but it actually has more colors to the palette, and you need to. Then I think if we move into a couple of new ones, I think it's actually learnability, or stay and dare to stay agile and be passionate, curious. Because if you're going to be the change agent, and we've seen that the last 20 months, if you're going to do that, you have to be the change too, right? You can't be change averse. And I think this is where the profession, if I'm going to be honest, I think this is where a lot of HR our professionals been struggling a lot. It's like, let's be compliant, let's do whatever, like it's going to be policies, it's going to be all this. And that is true, but I don't necessarily think, if you're going to help and move the business, if you're going to be the change that the business needs, if you're going to make sure that you can look everybody in the eye and say, like, we're going to do good and you're going to have your job, it's going to be by us being successful as a company, not necessarily because we know all the label or the laws in the world. So I think that is. Then one of the things that I haven't heard, everybody talked about resilience or grit a couple of years ago, but I think that more was proven to be important for us the last year and a half, right? Because it was blow after blow. You mentioned all the things that happened. They were all there for a reason, and we all had to do that. And on top of that, do crisis management. It was hit, remit of all communication, over-index on communication, but the resilience and the grit. Well, some of the energy of that and some of the kind of making that possible also came of when you make a difference and when you have a purpose. Obviously you will have more energy and you feel stronger. But I think a lot of HR professionals around the world felt that when we went into Christmas, if you celebrate that, or the end year, that we were tired. We were super tired. And I think we were hoping for two reasons why the pandemic would be over, right? But again, roll with the punches. So to adapt. We talk about that a lot. That is what I think the main trait that we look for any employee at Spotify too. How can you stay passionate, curious, learn faster than the world is changing, and be more adaptable? So I think those are important things that we haven't talked that much about when we talk about HR, right? And then comm skills, or even selling skills, or if you would call them like influencer skills. Yeah. How do you sell an idea? If you're going to be the change agent, you have to be able to sell that. You have to be able to package that. You have to think as a marketeer, but you're not selling a product, you're selling an idea, right? And I usually, quote Nietzsche and say, people don't necessarily have to like your decision, but they have to understand it. And if you can't communicate, they will not understand it. And then they will do everything in their power not to see that change happen. So I think that is important. And then the thing that I think has been important for a long time, but it would be wrong of me not to talk about it. It is, you can't do anything with HR if you don't have business acumen. So what made you, in best case, successful in this company will not make you successful in the next company. You have to understand the industry. You need to understand that what makes that particular culture and animal tick, that is your company. And what are the big levers there? And then you apply your HR skills on top of that. So I know that was a long-winded kind of answer, but I think it's like it's a full-bodied kind of not just HR acumen. I think it's more business acumen. And then I think there is a couple of personal traits that we will see be more important in the coming years. if not decade.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it on the criteria, and you mentioned obviously kind of going to Christmas last year, the holiday season, HR was tired. I think a lot of HR is still pretty tired. I want to do one quick additional poll for you viewing, and it's around burnout. I think that we've been having a lot of conversations around burnout in HR and how some people just the constant demands on the field and our frankly lack of ability to create boundaries for ourselves oftentimes just gets us so into the weeds that we just hit a breaking point. And I'm running a report right now to get some data on actually CPO sentiments over the last 18 months and, who have transitioned to new jobs, who've left the field entirely, who've stayed put. So I'll have that ready to publish in about a week or so. But I'm curious just for you, do you have any self-care practices that kind of help you preserve your own, well-being as you're leading the organization through all of these different things that we've mentioned?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that works really well for me. First of all, I didn't have to train, so I was giving a gift from my parents. I have an on and off switch, right? So when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm not, I couldn't care less. But I know that even same family, my sister, she doesn't have that switch, so she has to practice that. But a couple of things that anybody can do. We do a lot of walk and talk, and I have done that this last 17 years. I introduced that when I used to work in the oil business. You don't have to take meetings in a meeting room, and these days it doesn't have to be on screen, right? It does. You can have somebody in your earphones and you can walk if you're not allowed, or now when everybody was quarantined or had to stay at home in some parts of the world. But just to get that exercise, and it doesn't have to be a gym, it doesn't have to be racquetball or something, especially if it's a pandemic, but you can walk. So you get energy and you are semi-fit, which I think is good. The second thing is you have to get your sleep. You have to sleep, and then also obviously you have to eat quite well. And I'm not a super healthy person, but I think these very simple things will keep you fit when you have like wave after wave after wave of activism. You have a pandemic that is like running crazy amok around the world. You have people that are scared. You also are launching new markets and you leading the change. And you want to disrupt things within HR. Obviously, it's quite simple, but it's hard, right? But eat, sleep, and walk. I think those are the things. And then you also have to remind your thing. Your job is maybe important. Your job is, you can take that serious. You can't really take yourself serious. You have to laugh a lot, I think. And when you're blessed with the best team in the world, which I think I have, the best HR team. This is where you also undress yourself in the way that you lower your guard, you talk about your feelings, you have a support system, and you have a good laugh about things, right? So you have to diffuse and debrief, I think, in a safe environment. I think those things are important.
Yeah, well, I like that, and I appreciate your just sticking to the fundamentals on self-care. And
how do you do, Lars?
I do this. I'm a dad of two young girls, and it's whatever my day is, when I kind of step out of the office and I hang out with them, like I hear about their day, they want to draw something, they want to play something. It's hard to hold on to that. I wouldn't say that it erases it all. Like, it's still in the back of my head. I still sometimes wake up at night and been thinking about things that I need to do. So I don't have that off switch. I'm not blessed with that like you are, but I think for me, a family is just super grounding, and being able to spend time with my wife and my kids, and just have that, especially working from home. It's like literally I walk 10 feet and it's a different environment. So that's been a big help for me. And even getting back to the burnout question. So looking at the survey responses, 83% of you feel you've experienced burnout over the last 18 months. So again, data point that I think is consistent with what we've all been hearing. Katarina, we're going to do rapid fire Q&A. We got some questions from the audience. I do want to cover some of these before we wrap up, but we're going to have to keep our answers pretty tight as we drill through these in about 5 minutes. So you ready for this?
Yes.
All right. The first question is from Allison Sproul. Hopefully I'm not butchering your last name too bad. What can we do for team building purposes, asynchronously or for distributed teams? Any good remote team building activities that have worked for you?
Yes, we do the Swedish fika, which means that we chit chat, we don't talk about work, and we bring a cup of coffee and we eat a cinnamon roll together. I think that is, we have done we have done dancing, we've done a lot of karaoke. We've done a lot of things that you usually don't do, and you don't necessarily have all to be at the same time because we record everything, which makes it even sillier. You feel quite stupid when you dance to music in your own kitchen, and then somebody will watch that 24 hours later in Sydney.
Side note, I want to have a fika with your team sometime before this whole pandemic thing is over. So next question comes from Jamie Moore. He says, with more people coming to an office on an ad hoc and as needed basis, we expect lower daily attendance and fewer spontaneous connections. Do you have any recommendations or ideas for orchestrating spontaneous face-to-face connections?
Yeah, we do the roulettes where you can sign up and then with people that you randomly don't know from different parts of the organization, from different floors and that. So that is one thing. The other thing is you can actually be quite smart on where you put things that everybody needs to use. So it's not on every floor. I know that when we build our offices, sometimes people go, why isn't like a pantry on every floor? It's because we want people to move around. It's not because we can't put a pantry in on every floor. It used to be like when you had postal service and you got like mail, we used to have that on one floor again, so people get up from their chair and bump into each other. So there are smart things that you can do to make people, both come into the office if that is after work or anything like that. Or anything, for us, it's the office sessions where musicians come in and play for us. Then people come in and you don't really organize then how people stand in front of the stage, right? And then they start to have a conversation. So they're very small things that you don't have to over-engineer, but just make sure that people move around and also come into the office once in a while.
Next question comes from Tara Haynes. She asks, mentions she loves the idea of a band reunion. What was the structure for it? How did you organize that?
So being a platform company, obviously we created a platform. We had pre-reads, which was a VOD, a video on demand, with Daniel and myself talking about, more or less the history, the 15 years, and what he was thinking when he created the Spotify platform. And then there was kind of a designed workshop that was led by managers, not by HR. Very easy instructions, and then everything is open, everything is transparent, and then they upload their discussions and the things that they thought was important. And now you can go in, you can scroll on the globe, and it comes up what they talked about in Madrid, what they talked in Sao Paulo, and then there are like a conclusion of the whole tour of what is important, why people joined, and it's designed that way that you get a break, you get together, you discuss things that is not necessarily what we need to build or what we're going to ship today. It's all about community. It's all about you. It's reminding ourselves about the values. It's pressure testing the values, but also a lot about our mission and why you joined and so it's very easy, but everything is transparent and it involves everybody.
Yeah, well, that's awesome feedback. Awesome to get a look inside of how that works. And thank you for spending some time with us. Again, as I said at the beginning in the intro, you've always been a huge advocate for working out loud and sharing your practices, and this conversation was no different. So thank you for giving us all a look inside of Spotify's Work From Anywhere program and policies, sharing your deck with all of us. And just a reminder for any of you that came in late, you can actually download the deck over on the handouts tab of the chat. So jump over there, download that deck. It'll be great inspiration for any of you that are designing remote and or hybrid plans. And Katarina, last word for you.
So it was a pleasure talking to all of you. It was nice to see you again, Lars. I hope it's going to be in 3D soon. And then you know, what I really loved about the last 20 months is that we come together, HR professionals from everywhere. I think open source is something that we all kind of help us do with crisis management. I hope that this will continue. And our job has never been more important. It's never been more difficult. It's never been harder, but it's also never been more fun. So congratulations to all of us for being in something that is important now and in the future. And good luck, everybody. And, you know, your spirits up, and please stay safe and stay strong. And hopefully it's going to be an open and safe world soon.
Well, Katarina, thanks again for your time, your wisdom, and sharing your practice with all of us. And for all of you viewing, thanks for spending time with us. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and enjoy the rest of Culture Summit. Have a great day.